Shame on you, 1819. He was outed for doing a hobby. There is no reason that cross-dressing should be a problem in our society. This hobby probably cost him his life. Hello, and thank you for tuning in. It's Brandi's World. Today, we are going to talk about a pastor and a small town mayor from Alabama. Why, Brandi? Why are you talking about a small town pastor and was a small town mayor named Bubba Copeland, a Republican conservative Southern First Baptist pastor? I would expect myself to be talking about a Southern Baptist from Alabama as, ooh, this is going to be scary. F.L. Bubba Watson also had a hobby. Ooh, a hobby. Whoa, how can that be scary? This hobby probably cost him his life. Not the hobby itself, don't get me wrong. His hobby happened to be in a poisoned well. Well, what does that mean? What is his hobby? F.L. Bubba Copeland enjoyed cross-dressing. Scary, right? Ever since he was a kid, according to his own reports, he enjoyed to, in privacy of his own home, dress up and present feminine. Yes, harmless thing of cross-dressing. So why would that cost him his life? Because he's doing it in a society here in the United States of America in 2023 when anything outside of the gender norms in this country is going to cause ire of certain groups of people. And being a Southern First Baptist preacher, I'm sure he's expected to be upheld to certain standards. So let me tell you a little bit about F.L. Bubba Copeland. F.L. Bubba Copeland was a small town mayor and a pastor at a First Baptist church in Alabama. Copeland tragically died of suicide last Friday night, a few days ago. This is unnecessary. This is tragic because he was outed for doing a hobby. Yes. A pastor was doing a hobby that he was outed for doing. There's nothing wrong with this hobby. Okay, his hobby was he enjoyed cross-dressing. He self-proclaimed that since he was a child, cross-dressing, dressing in feminine clothing in his own privacy of his own home was a stress relief for him. And that's what he did as a hobby. And he started a persona online and presented his online persona as a curvy, sexy woman. I don't think that it was his gender identity. There's a difference between having a gender identity that is transgender or your identity does not align with your assigned gender identity. Cross-dressing can fall under the umbrella of trans or non-binary or non-cis, but not necessarily. Most cross-dressers are straight heterosexual men. That's kind of most of them. There's going to be some gay men who cross-dress, there's going to be bisexual men, and there's also going to be straight men. Could fall for all of those things. But cross-dressing is playing the role, expressing a persona, not your identity, but your persona. And that's fine. People do that all the time. That's a great hobby. LARPing, right? Live action role play. That's also an expression of a persona. So is cross-dressing. It can be a big part of your life, and it can be a big influence on who you are. But it doesn't necessarily claim that's who you are. That is what you do. That is a hobby. Me, as a transgender woman, I I don't like to cross-dress. I like to express who I am on the inside. So that doesn't fall for me. I learned this kind of the hard way. When I first discovered my gender identity, I went out to clubs dressed immediately. The first day I discovered my gender identity, I was like, let's go out. And at the time, I didn't understand and realize that I was tapping into my core self-identity. Honestly, I thought maybe I stumbled onto cross-dressing and it was really exciting. It was something that was for me. And so I went out and I met other cross-dressers out at clubs. I met some pretty cool friends. And I recall hanging out with one of my cross-dresser friends. We'll call her Chrissy. So Chrissy, the way Chrissy would explain to me, they loved being a chameleon. They loved going to work during the day and expressing masculine and just being the masculine person they are. And then at night, they like to get all dressed up, put makeup on, put the wig on, put the clothes on, and just be feminine and just explore femininity and just have fun with that. And to them, it was a sexual thrill. It was exciting. It was an adventure. It was them out doing a thing. And so when Chrissy invited me to go shopping with them, I was like, yes, I need to learn how to shop for clothing. It was all new to me. Makeup was new to me. Clothing was new to me. This is like, I've been exploring my gender identity at that point for about maybe a week and a half. And so I was like, I need to figure out makeup. I need to figure out clothing. Yeah, let's go with Chrissy. So I get all dolled up. I put makeup best I could. It was awful back then. I get all dolled up and I go to meet Chrissy. And I park outside and text Chrissy, I'm here, I'm outside your house. And out walked Justin. It wasn't Chrissy, it was Justin. And I felt so out of place because I was like, when they opened the door and got in my car, I was like, I thought you were going to be dressed. And they're like, why? I'm not out dressing. I'm just being me. And I was like, that day I started to realize, wait a minute, they have a completely different persona about expressing femininity to them than it was to me. To me, it was like, the more I started tapping into my femininity, the more I wanted to express it. I didn't want to express masculinity after that. I want to keep expressing this femininity I was tapping into. And to them, it was just like, no, they just like to turn that switch on and off. And it was very awkward shopping with Justin. I didn't really know Justin. I got to know the nights before hanging out with Chrissy. Whoa, we don't all live under one monolith of what is trans. It's an umbrella. There's different groups of people who view their gender and sexuality in different ways. To me, I wanted to express my feminine self all the time. And apparently for cross-dressers, that's not the case. They like to dress up. Like Bubba Copeland expressed, it was a hobby for him. He liked doing it. Nothing wrong with that. And in fact, he said outside of him having his little online persona, in real life, only his wife knew. And he would dress up for her occasionally, apparently. Until there's a right-wing news organization called 1819. And 1819 did an article on FL Bubba Copeland. And in this article, they out him as a cross-dresser. In his church, they weren't preaching anti-trans messages, not that I have seen. In fact, I noticed on one of the pictures outside of that church he was a pastor of, it said all is welcome. And I'm sure they meant that. So why did he die of suicide? An article came out about him. It outed him as a cross-dressing person, as his hobby. He happened to have been a mayor. He happened to have been a preacher. Does that not mean he should not have a perfectly healthy and normal hobby? What is wrong with that hobby? What is wrong with it is because it exists in a poisoned well. Our society today, in 2023, is trying to poison that well even more. To exist as a cross-dresser, to exist as a transgender person, to exist as a non-binary person, to exist as a non-cis person, is to exist in a poison well in today's United States of America. And that is sad. It should not be a poisoned well. It should be a lovely, welcoming well. It is awesome to be trans, because being trans means that you are expressing your inner self. You are able to do that. To have a hobby, to dress up in the quote other gender's clothing or expression. A hobby for people who think it's fun. There's nothing wrong with that. They should not be shamed in the least amount. It does not talk to that person's character outside of the character they're portraying. The guy had a hobby, and he was outed for having this hobby, and it should have been no big deal. Oh yeah, he has a hobby. He goes skiing. He likes fishing. He enjoys clog dancing. He enjoys cross-dressing. He enjoys skydiving. Whatever his hobby is, that's his hobby. It should not be a point of shame, regret so deeply that he felt that death by suicide was a solution here. He felt so much pressure that he ended his life because people knew, or people now know, that he had a hobby of dressing in women's clothing. That is sad. That is sad that this person is no longer with us because he felt that society would be so harsh on him that he could not handle this. Whatever was going on in his head, his death by suicide should not have been the answer. And it should not have been the answer because the well where he had this hobby should not have been poisoned. He should have had a well of love and acceptance in this hobby of his. Shame on the news outlet 1819 for making that a story. It wasn't a story in itself. If he was a hypocrite, if Bubba Copeland was a hypocrite in talking about how sinful and bad he thinks activities of cross-dressing was, then you have a story. But you don't have a story about a person who happens to be a mayor and happens to be a Southern First Baptist preacher who happens to have a hobby of dressing up in women's clothing. That is not a story. That is a person's life, and you screwed with it. Your news organizations and many news organizations like that who take a slant and say it should be poisoned. If people exist in the transgender community, they should be labeled as poisoned. That whole community should be poisoned. That is what is happening. And that is the effects of a poisoned well. This man died because he was pushed into a poisoned well that he simply enjoyed having a hobby of. That is not what killed this man. It is the society around him. That society who has convinced him that his hobby was so egregious towards society that death by suicide was an answer. Here's a quote from FL Bubba Copeland. "What I do in private life has nothing to do with what I do in my holy life," Copeland continued. "Does this have any effect on my being mayor, that I sometimes put on a dress or sometimes put on makeup? Does that have anything to do whatsoever with me being mayor or being a pastor?" Close quote. He is absolutely right there. That has nothing to do with it. But the culture around him made it an issue. Should have been celebrated, but they made it an issue. And this is some of the verbiage that was used in 1819's article on Copeland that came out on the 1st of November 2023. Copeland also declined to offer an explanation to the citizens of Smith Station or his church parishioners about his so-called hobby. Why? Why call it so-called hobby? It was his hobby. Do you have a so-called job of journalism? Or do you have a job of journalism? That was his hobby, not his so-called hobby. They continue. He said he believed his activities was, quote, not relevant and only regulated to the privacy of his home. He repeatedly referred to his activities as akin to, quote, dress up and cosplay. Yeah. They're making quotes of him just talking because they have nothing there. There was no article there. They just wanted to expose a man and shame him because cross-dressing is shameful in our society. And that is where the problem lies. It should not be a problem. There is no reason that cross-dressing should be a problem in our society. It should be a hobby enjoyed by people who enjoyed that hobby. My goodness. And his church leaders didn't even have a problem with it. When the story came out a couple of days after that, they were like confused on what was the issue. They were like, he runs his own church. We have to stop this madness of saying if you exist as a trans person or you are a cross-dressing person, you don't deserve dignity and normality. This madness. We deserve all the equality and all the normality as any other citizen, regardless of your hobby. That hobby was not hurting anyone. That hobby was not dangerous. That hobby was his hobby. And people shamed him so much for that. His story ends by suicide. And that is sad, people. Shame on you, 1819. Shame on you and all the other news organizations who deepen the well of poison for us to exist as trans or non-binary or just othered. Shame on you. Remember, love yourself, but more importantly, like yourself and treat people the way they want to be treated. Bye-bye for now.